Hey my good friends, Sam Haymart with Test Driven TV. Today we are test driving the 2023 Mazda CX-9 Signature, the top of the line version of Mazda's top of the line crossover SUV, the biggest one they offer. So I'm going to show it to you inside and out. We're going to take it for a test drive and then I'm going to tell you what I really think. All right, my friends, before we get out on the test drive, let's look at what we've got here. This is the 2023 Mazda CX-9 Signature all-wheel drive. It is the top trim grade. This starts out quite a bit lower than the $50,000 as tested price of this particular one. If you start with the touring trim grade, which is now the baseline if you get into the CX-9. All-wheel drive is standard across the board. So if you're looking at this vehicle, it probably looks familiar, and it should. It's been around for 8 years with very few changes. In fact, when we first did our test drive of this current generation of the CX-9, it was in 2015. And really, the only thing that's changed, if you're looking at this picture, is the fact that I've got a red one instead of a gray one. The grill's a little bit different, and well, I might have put on an extra few pounds in that 8-year period. But looking at the styling, a few differences up there. The grille design, the chrome bar element is a little bit different. LED headlights, they still have that very distinctive signature design. And what I liked about it then, and what I still like about the design, is that there's a lot of depth and articulation as you look at the front end. A lot of cars now with their aerodynamic design, they have kind of a wallpapered on design effect here. If you get up in there, there's depth in all of the sculpting in the grille, and you can put your hand in there. There's articulation, there's architecture going on there. And if you look at the side profile, the front end actually has a very forward-leaning silhouette, also something very unique in the market. And so I've always appreciated this vehicle for that. And if you're comparing features across other makes out there, this does have adaptive LED headlights. This does have LED fog lights down at the bottom. This does have pretty good size wheels. They're 20-inch alloy wheels with a nice satin finish, and they are a nice step up from the 18-inch wheels you're going to find on the lower trim grades. Coming down the side, you can see that this has the traditional black plastic cladding we've come to know on SUVs and crossovers. This does have a bit of an elevated presence though, a nice strip of chrome on that lower rocker to give it a more premium appearance. And up here on the top, a full set of roof rails up here, and they do have provisions to add crossbars built in, so you don't have to worry about getting some kind of accessory. You can get those either from the dealer, or a lot of the mainstream accessories will attach right to that. Sunroof on the top, but notably not a panoramic sunroof here on the top of the line model. Looking at the taillights, LED taillights here, and these are highly sculpted, very much like the detail we saw on the front. A big thick piece of chrome connecting those two, and there's a lot of indentation here, a lot of sculpting and depth in the actual design and detail, and that's sort of a novelty in our market today. This is a power operated liftgate, as you'd expect now in this particular trim grade and in this class. Down the lower bumper, another thing that I sort of find refreshing is genuine exhaust tips down there. You can actually burn yourself if you touch those things, and I know that seems a bit daft of me to point that out, but most everything on the market today has these big fake trim things that just aren't the real thing, so it's kind of refreshing. This is deja vu all over again. The interior of the signature trim grade in the CX-9 is very nicely done. Soft touch materials almost everywhere your hand roams, particularly underneath your arms on the armrests, and genuine rosewood trim on the center console, on the door panels. The point is especially up here in this high trim grade, this is very well done. And look at the seats. Napa leather seats, and they've got some beautiful diamond stitching in them. Here, these are both heated and ventilated up front, power operated both for the driver and the passenger. I did find that they're pretty comfortable this week, though I will share that you sit on these seats rather than in them. They don't hold you, they hold you up. And so in that way, with their relative firmness, I did find that after a day of driving in this vehicle, I was ready to get out of these things. As I sit here and look forward, I do have a nice leather covered steering wheel with nice switchgear on it. paddle shifters for the 6-speed automatic, and the instrument cluster ahead of me appears to be a traditional instrument cluster. Analog dials, but the center screen is actually a big digital TFT cluster made to look like an analog dial, and you can customize those information sets and switch it from kilometers to miles per hour and so forth. Pretty cool, I think. Center stack, Mazda's infotainment system, big screen up on the dash. Down below that, HVAC controls here in the console area, a nice place down here to put your phone, and there is a wireless charger here on this one. There's a traditional shifter here, which I like, drive mode selector, and the infotainment controls here. This is nice where the cup holders are down low. You can put big gas station cups here and they're going to fit. And storage in here in the clamshell section. Not too big though. It's about the size, almost big enough for a square tissue box, but not much more. And there just isn't a whole lot of other storage in here beyond that. There is a sunroof above my head, but as I mentioned on the exterior, not a panoramic sunroof. Something that some of the competitors, actually most of the competitors, offer, especially in their top trim grades. For your rear seat passengers, they're going to be pretty happy for the most part. Essentially the same feeling seats as what we have up front. A nice seating height, plenty of legroom, lots of headroom up here, and these seats do adjust fore and aft so that you can give space to your third row. And looking back there, it's really for kids, but you could put some adults back there in a pinch, and getting into that third row, not too difficult. These seats do slide forward and the backs go forward, so you have pretty good ingress egress. Because we do have captain's chairs here with this nice big console in the center, there is no center row access like some of the competitors offer, but this is pretty nice. It has storage inside here and cup holders, heated seats back here. Bonus, and a lot of other amenities, vents on the back of the console and controls for the HVAC back here. You've got some nice shades here, which can be pretty nice on a hot day. Looking at the rear cargo area, not too big with the third row seats up, but they do fold down in a 50-50 split, and these captain's chairs do go down, giving you what is mostly a flat load floor. I will point out that the backs of these captain's chairs are upholstered in a nice vinyl, not a carpet. So you do want to protect these things if you plan on putting large, heavy things all the way forward. Under the rear floor, if you go down far enough, you're going to find a spare tire, which I always love in an SUV because sometimes we want to go out adventuring where there's no cell service. And if you don't have a spare tire, well, you're going to be in a mess if you actually damage one and have to have it. So that's a nice thing there, some extra storage on top of that. When it comes to rating this interior, I am for the most part impressed. The one thing I will point out is that this particular press car has about 8,000 miles on it, and I have noticed that there's a lot of wear and tear on this interior. These materials, especially this piano black on the consoles, tends to show wear. There's a lot of scuff marks on it, and the soft trims in and around the interior tend to show wear pretty easily. So something to look out for if you're looking at buying and keeping one of these things long term. Overall though, this interior gets 4 out of 5 stars. When it comes to the infotainment system, I'm just going to lay it right out there right away. I'm very familiar with Mazda's system that's in this, and I got to tell you, I just don't like it. The screen up top is larger than it has been before. There is more feature content now in the newer CX-9, Bose audio backend, 360-degree camera monitor, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. It has most of what we expect here. Native navigation, those are all good things, but the elephant in the room here is the user interface. This is not a touch screen. All of the control for this entire system is right here on the center console with a puck and a few buttons and a knob. Simple things like changing a radio station and saving it in your favorites is 2, 3, 4, and 5 menu layers deep. It's difficult to do, and you certainly don't want to be doing these things behind the wheel where you're driving. You have to spin this puck around and page through menus to do one thing to another. There's no intuitiveness whatsoever, and it's just difficult and slow and clunky. And I said this back in 2015 when I first test drove this vehicle with the same exact system. I say it with every Mazda, and the Mazda owners out there, you don't like to hear this from me, but this system is honestly the worst system on the market when it comes to everything else offered out there by other competitors. It's difficult to use. It's unsafe. It's a DOS prompt where everyone else has moved on to Windows, if you know what I'm saying. So when it comes to rating this system, it doesn't get a very good score. And I know all you Mazda people are going to come at me like you always do, like a bunch of bees. I just stuck a stick in the nest. But all I would tell you is put down the pipe. There's a bigger world for you out there beyond that dark room you're living in. Okay, every other manufacturer's moved on from this stuff. Okay, they have bigger screens, they have more features, they have graphics, they have easy to use menus, they have volume knobs and tuning knobs. You can go click, click, click. I just tuned my station. You don't have to do this putt stuff for 3 or 4 menu. No, okay, no. Mazda, you need to get rid of this. This is awful. It's awful. This infotainment system gets 3 out of 5 stars. All right. Finally, time to take a drive. And if you watch my videos, the first question I always like to ask is, how does it go? So let's come to a complete stop. We're out here in the middle of nowhere, so there's nobody around. 0 and go. Woo. All right, finally up and going. And 60. It's got a pretty decent sound, I will say that, and this does have paddle shifters to use. What's under the hood here is a 2.5 liter turbocharged engine, the top engine from Mazda. Here it has 227 horsepower and 310 pound-feet of torque, and here it goes through a 6-speed automatic transmission. Now, power I would call leisurely. This isn't exactly something that falls into the enthusiastic sporting type of character when it comes to power. And it's worth pointing out that when this first came out, it was one of the first 3-row SUVs with a turbocharged 4-cylinder instead of a V6. Almost all of its competitors back in 2015 and 2016 all had V6s. Well, maybe it was ahead of its time. Today, almost all of its competitors now have turbocharged 4-cylinders. The Toyota Highlander, the Kia Sorento, the Ford Explorer. But in that time, they've also become more powerful. The Highlander, 265 horsepower, the Sorento, 281 horsepower, and the Explorer, 300 horsepower. So yes, the world has finally come around to joining the fray with a 4-cylinder turbo engine, but they're all quite a bit more powerful. And more importantly, all of the competitors have 8, 9, or 10-speed automatic transmissions. Here, we still have a very old-fashioned 6-speed. And so what does that do? That gives us less opportunity for that engine to get to its power peak, so you feel less acceleration. It also offers less opportunity for this engine to be in its most efficient power curve or its most efficient speed, therefore less efficient. This is rated at 20 mpg city, 26 highway, and 23 combined. In my week with it, I only achieved 21. So in the time that all the competitors took to get to a 4-cylinder turbo, this has just become less competitive, not only in its power, its drivability, but in its efficiency. And to drivability, you really do notice that, especially pulling mountain passes. You really have to wait for this to get up to the next gear to change. Overall though, I do find that the refinement level of this engine and powertrain just now isn't quite up to the same level as many of the competitors. This powertrain gets 3 out of 5 stars. Ride, drive, and handling is an area where Mazda has always sort of stood out from the crowd because they've been the more sporty, driver-oriented choice in the marketplace, particularly from the Japanese manufacturers. And so the CX-9 tends to have a little bit more of a handling and sporting tune to its suspension and to its chassis. That's always been the case, though when it first came out, by comparison to many of the competitors out there, it seemed to be a little bit on the softer side. So I don't know if tuning has been changed since then, but here, by comparison to most of what's on the market out here on a windy road, around town, or speed bumps, things like that, this tends to feel like it has a bit of a firmer suspension with a little bit more of a tighter steering feel, which is to say, it's still the sporting choice. But in my week with it, one of the things I found is that the suspension tends to be clunky and noisy. I get a lot of metal-to-metal harshness when I go over bumps and speed bumps, tar strips on the freeway, or harder bumps. I do have to admit that all of the creaking and the squeaking and the harshness from the suspension has me wondering a little bit what happens when the pavement ends. And And that brings us to the desert washboard road, where things just got a little bit more interesting. And that's the thing with an SUV. We want to know what it's like to drive off the road, because that's where the manufacturers keep telling us that's where we can take it. And so out here on the desert washboard road, these rhythmic bumps and vibrations are really something I can feel in this chassis. And as I hit some of these harsher bumps, I'm getting more of that sensation that the suspension just really isn't all that heavy duty. A lot of crashing, metal to metal feel, and just roughness and harshness from particularly the front suspension. And again, lots of creaking going on in this structure. The trim in this interior seems to be rattling. I'm getting rattling from the dash. I'm getting rattling from the trim on the doors back here and the seats themselves. It just doesn't quite feel nearly as solid out here as it does on the pavement. And yes, that goes without saying, but some SUVs do better than others. When it comes to handling and overall composure, it loses some of its polish as well. So overall, this is a chassis that, well, probably best left on the pavement. This chassis gets 4 out of 5 stars. All right, my friends, we've taken it for a drive. We sat in it. We've played with all the knobs and buttons. I've showed it to you inside and out. Now the question becomes, the only thing we haven't talked about is it worth the money? And here's the thing, $50,000 fully loaded. This is the most you can spend on this vehicle. You can get it for a little bit less, but I really like to look at, when I start measuring value for the money, what can you get for the money if you go elsewhere? And in the time, the 8 years that this vehicle's been on the market with little or no change, just a few little things here and there, every other option you can spend your money on out there in this class has been completely redesigned from the ground up, some twice. Hyundai, Kia, Ford, Nissan, I mean, Honda, the list goes on and on and on. They've all got new vehicles since this was introduced. And like I said, some twice. So pretty much everything that you can compare this to offers more power, more room, more features, more tech, more modernity, okay? This is still a great option to look at. It's got unique design. It's a Mazda. If you love Mazdas, have a look. But when I compare it to everything else out there, $50,000, there are just so many more options than there were when this first came out in 2016. So having said all that, these things aren't the same thing that I looked at back in 2016. I put value at 4 out of 5 stars. When you put that in with everything we've already talked about, we're at 3.5 stars for the review. Not the same score this got back in 2016, but the reality is the world's changed, right? This got older, so did I, if I'm honest. I'm probably not the same rating I was back in 2016, but I digress. That's just how it goes. So 3.5 out of 5 stars. Have a look at everything else before you buy this, if I'm honest. That's kind of my recommendation here. If you still like this after you drive it, buy it. So there you go. Now, if you like what we do, please follow us on social media. You can see all of our links and channels down below. See our latest video right there, but better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel right down there. Either way, stay tuned.